Welcome to this second of a series of broadcasts for Peat-Fest South-West. We're going to be recording this broadcast, so if you don't want to be seen, then please make sure that your image isn't on the screen. I'm pleased that already Claire Fox is saying hello to everyone. So we will be promoting the use of the chat function for you to ask questions from our speakers and to share us things to do with the peatlands and the focus of our presentation today. So we are, I am Naomi from the Art and Energy Collective, and we have a whole host of presenters today. Some exciting presenters, some people working with young people. We have people from the whole heritage sector, and we have conservationists working across the UK. So we're looking forward to the stories that they're going to be telling today. As many of you know, today is the first day of COP30, which is the conference of the parties meeting in Belém in Brazil, and they are going to hopefully make some progress in the face of the climate change and ecological emergencies. And you know, the mighty Amazon forest in Brazil is one thing, but all the mossy micro forests in the UK, in the Southwest, around the world, are also doing their bit towards carbon sequestration and in response to climate change. And so on this first day then of that, while that's going on in Brazil, we are meeting locally, talking in the Southwest about peatlands, about peatland stories, about our heritage and the role of creativity in sharing that heritage and inspiring curiosity for peatlands, whatever and whoever you are. So it's all part of Peat-Fest South-West, which has been going on in the region over the summer and this autumn. And we have been holding events and workshops. We've got these broadcasts, we've got podcasts. I'd recommend that you go on to our website and have a poke around and see what you can find. We're recording this broadcast, obviously, as part of that. So that will be on our website too. So without more ado then, we will start the presentations, and we'll first of all go over to Jane Akerman, who is working for the IUCN Peatland Programme across the UK and has a wonderful presentation to show us. So over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Naomi. I'll just share my screen. You see that okay?
Yes, we can. I don't know whether you want to make it bigger.
Oh, hang on. I'm just checking that the sound's coming on again after our tests earlier.
Yes.
Okay. There. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to Art and Energy for inviting me along to speak this morning. As Naomi says, I'm Jane Akerman and I'm the Programme Manager at the IUCN UK Peatland Programme. Now, peatlands are one of our most precious yet misunderstood habitats, deeply connected to human history over millennial timescales. They might be bogs, fens, swamps, wet woodlands, valley mires, but they are all wet places, or at least they should be. This wetness has been both a blessing and a curse for peatlands, providing them with the resilience to survive for thousands of years, but making them places that people want drier. No one wants to get bogged down or stuck in the mire, do they? And peatlands are time capsules and slow places. Because of their wetness, low oxygen levels mean that processes of decay in peatlands are much, much slower than we see in other habitats like drier woodlands or grasslands or sand dunes. This means they preserve things incredibly well, enabling us to open a window on the past and telling their own story. Peat is a rich, dark shelter for objects from the past. It grows slowly. Just 1 millimetre of new peat is formed every year when a peatland is healthy, meaning 1 metre of peat, like that in the picture on the slide, can tell 1,000 years of stories. We know from the stories we decipher from peatlands that they've provided homes, food, fuel, and other resources for humans for thousands of years. So here in the southwest of England, where I live, and indeed across much of the UK, peatlands were once mosaics of wet woodlands, bogs and fens, traversed by wooden trackways, where Neolithic people hunted, worshipped, and buried their dead. The peatlands here provided minerals and metals which developed human civilization from the Bronze Age onwards, including tin, which was traded thousands of miles away in the Eastern Mediterranean. From the Roman period through to the 20th century, peat turf was cut to provide fuel for cooking and heating homes, to thatch roofs, and later to run steam engines. Sadly, it's still extracted in the Somerset levels today to make compost. Understanding these stories from the past, the way in which peatlands have changed and been changed over time, is so important in helping us shape a future vision for peatlands in which they are valued and understood. Today, the peatlands of the southwest are places where livestock graze, where minerals are still extracted to make ceramics or paper, and where millions of people seek exercise, fun, or solace, spending time in nature to build resilience and to find respite from the stresses of the modern world. They make us happy, and they are still a fundamental part of our culture and livelihoods. Whether they are wet or drained, whether you know you're on a peatland or not, whether you're a walker, a bird watcher, a common grazer, a climber, a kayaker, a farmer. Because of our past relationships of exploitation and extraction, around 80% of peatlands in the UK are damaged and degraded. The situation is even worse for some of our southwest peatlands, like Dartmoor, where only around 1% of the deep peat there is healthy. Peatlands have been deliberately drained so we can cut turf to warm our homes or make compost, so we can grow non-native trees like Norway or Sitka spruce for timber, so we can graze animals, extract stone, metals and minerals, so we can grow crops, put up wind turbines, or simply live and work on dry land in this small and densely populated nation. Once they're drained, peatlands lose their ability to function as wetlands, and the peat is slowly lost, along with the carbon and the stories it contains. 1 or 2 centimetres a year can be lost from a damaged peatland. That's 10 or 20 years of peat growth. It doesn't take a mathematician to understand this is the very definition of unsustainable. But the good news is we can stop this. The IUCN UK Peatland Programme exist to promote peatland restoration in the UK and support the many organisations and individuals working to stop the damage, block the drains and make peatlands wet places again. We help people understand that these are damaged and threatened landscapes, but that if we fix them, they can help us fight climate change by storing carbon. They can keep our homes safe by mitigating flooding. They can provide us with clean drinking water, and they can support the biodiversity that makes our world better, richer and more resilient. Intact and restored peatlands can continue to safeguard our heritage into the future. When you're trying to tell a story that's complex and difficult to navigate, you need a big and diverse toolbox. The IUCN UK Peatland Programme aims to bring together the three pillars of science, policy and practice, so that each one feeds into the other and makes it more effective. And creative practice is like a scaffold that supports all those things, making them stronger with a network of ideas that reaches beyond our usual audiences or makes new connections in the collective brain of the people working to restore peatlands. Telling stories is the best way to capture people's attention, to move them so they feel an emotional connection to what's being said, or an empathy with the storyteller that makes them more likely to remember, to share the story, and to act. The folklore, myths and legends associated with peatlands are all stories that have been passed from one person to the next and have shaped our understanding and connection to these places. We all remember the terror of the Hound of the Baskervilles, or the desolation of the Swamp of Sadness in the Never-Ending Story. It's crucial that we tell stories now that help to reshape our relationship with peatlands, moving away from exploitation and fear towards appreciation and restoration. I've been fortunate in my work to meet and collaborate with some incredible scientists, archaeologists, writers, artists, poets, songwriters, and others who use creative approaches to tell peatland stories and engage people of all ages and from all walks of life, like many of the people here today. Our Virtual Peatlands Pavilion is a collaborative project with the United Nations Environment Programme-led Global Peatlands Initiative, and we've created a digital world filled with stories about peatlands from around the globe. Alongside reports, scientific papers and educational videos, it includes lots of contributions from photographers, filmmakers and other artists sharing peatland stories using different mediums. It's a low-carbon way of immersing yourself in peatlands and understanding how important they are on a global scale. The differences and commonalities between our peatland heritage and that of Australia, Antarctica, or Estonia. We also run Eyes on the Bog, a low-cost and long-term suite of methods for monitoring peatland health that can be conducted by citizen scientists, members of the public with no scientific training or background necessarily needed. We've been funding existing restoration projects to work with local artists to produce sculptures and interpretation boards so people can learn more about the peatlands where they live or visit and the work that is being done to restore and protect them and monitor their health using Eyes on the Bog. And using sculptures like these is a great way to celebrate peatland biodiversity and intrigue people enough that they want to find out more. Why is there a giant dragonfly sculpture on the moor? Should there be dragonflies here? The more eyes we have on the bog, the more we understand. Last year, we commissioned a short film called The Most Important Plant in the World by the artist Carolina Witzum, who's now a member of the Repeat community. The film tells the story of peatland restoration in the Peak District National Park through a family business, growing sphagnum moss to plant where peatlands have been damaged and need a helping hand to get the right vegetation back. And here's a short excerpt which features the director at Wiedemoss, Neil Wright, telling their story. And I think it illustrates really beautifully a reframed relationship with a plant that was once harvested from peatlands to dress soldiers' wounds, now being grown in culture and used to dress the wounds of our damaged peatlands.
Although our business has expanded quite quickly over the last few years, we still see ourselves very much as a family business. We have families working for us. All our staff are relatively local. We have an ethos of sustainability, and I think all our staff love that idea and that they're contributing in a small way to climate change benefits. I think sphagnum moss is the most important plant in the world. It absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere, locks it up, and provided the moors are kept intact, that CO2 as carbon is stored in the peat for millennium. I'm doing what I'm doing because of the importance to climate change. I believe sphagnum is the critical thing that I can make a contribution to climate change by producing. I would say I would be retired now if it wasn't for sphagnum moss and the importance I attach to sphagnum moss and its propagation for restoring peatlands all over Europe.
Peatlands aren't just archives of human cultural heritage. They're a fundamental part of our lives and culture today. And stories like those from the many people working at Wiedemoss celebrate that fact, connecting us to our ancestors, whose lives and livelihoods were also entwined with these places. Our recent annual conference took place in Northern Ireland, where a long history of turf cutting remains part of many people's consciousness. We told lots of stories as part of this event and ran 2 creative workshops to engage delegates with different ways of thinking about peatlands that they could use to enrich their work. Northern Ireland was home to the Nobel Prize-winning poet Seamus Heaney, who had a deep connection to peatlands throughout his life. Local poet Angeline King opened the conference by reading one of Heaney's poems, Tolland Man, about an Iron Age body discovered in a bog in Denmark, a reminder of our shared European peatland history. At Angeline's creative workshop on the second day of the conference, delegates were invited to write their own poem, inspired by bog bodies. And I'd like to close my presentation this morning with this one from Catriona Ferguson, a PhD researcher at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. Catriona wrote this poem about people in the future finding things in the bog from our generation. And I think it encapsulates our need to act and make peatlands wet again for future generations. It's called Death of an Industry. What gifts do we have from this shelf of history that we would gladly submit for deliverance? Marks that we'd wallow in, come teeming from the wounds. They'll dredge out the tar and the trolleys. We let the eels slip, grass gone rank, museums on the flesh of the living. Hooks come up empty. Tug the lines, the knots come away cleanly. You collapse without strain, unfurled in a moment. plug the gaps and let them brim over. Those on pasture pushed under. We'll float on boardwalks. Now, I came to Peatlands from a background in ecology, counting, classifying and measuring things. But I've developed a deeper understanding and connection to them through listening to their stories from everyone I encounter, whatever their background or their relationship to these places. In ecology, species diversity is critical to ecosystem function. But I also think diversity of ideas, expression and connection is critical to restore that function and to write new stories for these landscapes that will be proudly shared with future generations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jane. That was wonderful. That was a really lovely start to the broadcast today, giving that sense, I don't know, the deep richness of peat, how it emanates across us all and is so significant in so many ways. So thank you. We are now moving on to a pair of archaeologists and artists called Rose Ferraby and Melanie Giles, and they're both work academically with peat and art with academics, and they also are incredibly interested in what lies beneath and that the expression of that from a scientific as well as an artistic point of view. So I'm going to hand over to them. They're going to be in conversation through a presentation, and do keep the chat going. And if you've got any particular questions, then put them in the chat and we'll see whether we can follow it up. Thank you then. Over to you, Melanie and Rosie.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. And I hope everyone can see the screen there. I had a few technical problems earlier, but we think we've ironed them out. But it's so lovely to be present with you today. Rose and I have been working in very different ways on peat from our different perspectives. I'm an archaeologist at the University of Manchester. Rose, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm an archaeologist and an artist, and work between research and working to communicate different projects. But Mel and I have been working together for many years, haven't we, Mel?
Yes, indeed, and productively so. I hope you'll agree by the end of it. Rose, perhaps I could start by asking you about the range of your creative practice in relation to peatlands, because it really is quite vast, isn't it? You've got hardcore archaeological survey and heritage kind of support kind of experience in peatlands, and then we'll focus more on the creative projects we've done together.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I think it's one of the things that I love about peat is that I've been able to work in it in so many different ways, and starting, I suppose, really with when I got a job in Exmoor National Park, and we've got Ben from Exmoor here today as well, and started working on the Exmoor Myers project, which is now the South-West Peatland Partnership. Absolutely brilliant team down there, and working with them as the archaeologist on the project, got really interested not only in peat but in the sort of complexities of how we work with it, and how I suppose something that's so invisible or elusive in the landscape and yet so deep and full of stories, as Jane was just saying, you know, it's got this real richness to it and so many things that you can pick out of it, but it's very hard to sort of tune into that and begin to learn to see it or listen to the different voices there. And also, I suppose, with doing archaeological surveys and working with ecologists, you get to see lots of different ways of seeing data from the peat. And I love working with lots of different specialists because there's sort of different languages, aren't there? And lots of the researchers I used to work with at Exeter University, you know, they would tell me about all the very complex work they were doing with gases and things, and thinking about what gases were being taken in and what was coming out. And you get these lovely senses of things like the bog breathing, this lovely slow breath of a bog through time and through the night and the day, and these different rhythms. And I think that's the lovely thing, that everybody's different specialisms and voices bring something different in, and it allows us to kind of gather all that, doesn't it? And I think my creative work, I suppose, has allowed a different way of processing that and beginning to think about how we can communicate it to other people.
So could I ask you about the first pieces? So we started working together on a collaboration around peat. It was part of a University of Manchester project called Peat Past, Present and Future. And Rose, you were kind of struggling in that work about ways of capturing change in those landscapes and using the deep past to show peatlands had looked very different, but also that the archaeology was part of a dynamic story of human inhabitation in those bogs. And the peat collaboration consisted of two parts. There was your artistic practice, and then we brought together a group of poets, a whole range of different, established poets, kind of poets about to break out from various creative writing programmes, and indeed a variety of students at the University of Manchester, workshopping with them, meeting with other kinds of experts to create, a kind of a poetic response to peat. But would you just talk us through? I'm going to put up your two collage. Well, first of all, I'm going to show a picture of your studio, because we promised that we would talk about your actual creative practice. So tell us what we're seeing here, Rose, about the way in which you chose to respond to this central problem of representing change.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really big thing that came out of lots of the work we were doing in Exmoor, was this thing of how can you show people what peatlands have been, and that they've always been in this process of change, so that things like doing peatland restoration and any work within bogs is understood in its broader timescale. And within that, you've got all the different things of sort of people and all the different scales of what people are doing and human history, with this sort of amazingly complex ecological world that's going on at the same time. And when you asked me to be involved in the book, Mel, it had that lovely sense that sort of all the poets were challenged with the idea of approaching bogs from different directions, from very personal directions, or from human or natural, and there's a real diversity in there. And so with the two collages, I decided to make one sort of about the human histories but with the ecological in, and one more about the ecological with the human in as well. And collage is a brilliant format to work with this, and as you can see, it is a lot of fun. There's a lot of mess. What you probably can't see is the rest of the floor there, which is covered in like teeny tiny snippets of paper. But the lovely thing with collage is the way I start is to think about the sort of the colours and textures within a landscape, and both those that are visible on the surface and the ones that we see as archaeologists and ecologists down into the peat. So paint up lots of different paper. You can see on the left-hand side examples of that, and lots of different things together, and then just begin to cut them out and assemble them within a sort of rough plan of what I want to achieve. But very often the fantastic thing about collage is they sort of take on a life of their own, and as you're doing them, things move around, and I stick as I go along, so things get stuck, and then you think, I'm not sure that quite works, and you have to sort of react to it and create more, and you can layer up. And that's sort of how landscapes work, isn't it? They sort of, things are layering up, things are being put on top of each other. As one thing happens, it affects the balance or the way you see something else. And I think that's the lovely thing about making these. They're not just a finished picture. The making of them is part of the thinking process about all the kinds of things that we do. And then when you've done them, they sort of tell lots of different stories, or people might see them in lots of different ways. And the lovely thing with doing them with the poetry was just how we could then put them alongside different poems in the book. So we use little details when we design the book to sort of chime off different people's work. And of course, that reading becomes different when you have the poem as well. And I think the poetry gives this work a really different approach, doesn't it, Mel? And you're a poet, and how did you feel kind of coming to it from your side?
Well,
big
actually,
peat.
I think what you've just described, that the snipping, the moving around, the seeing where things fit, is a very poetic way of working. That's very much how I write my poems, and you realise that things don't quite fit and they need their own space, or actually lines or phrases begin to jostle against each other in alliterative ways. And so I think the way we work is quite similar in word or image, and I love seeing the evidence of your way of working. It kind of like fills me with inspiration for thinking more dynamically about my own writing practice, I suppose, as an archaeologist. I'm just going to forward so that people can see these wonderful collages. This is the first one, isn't it, Rose? People, peat. And I suppose what I love about your practice is that as an archaeologist, you are able to bring into one image the kind of the depth, both in time but also in space, and just pick out a couple of elements here of inspiration. Obviously, I love the trackways, but yeah, tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, this one's got all sorts of things in it, from all kinds of different work that I've done and what other people have done. And if you look carefully, you can see lots of sort of finds that you might recognise. So down at the bottom, very bottom in the right-hand corner, you can just see a little man, one of the wooden figures that was discovered. There's also a little pocket of discoveries from Star-Car and the Mesolithic discoveries that were made there in the wetlands. Little gatherings in the sort of middle bottom of sorts of finds that came from is it White Horse Hill in Dartmoor. And then as you go up towards the top, you've got different things that relate to peat cutting. So the sort of almost like the cuts through of the peat cutting, the different layers. And then at the very top, the sort of millennia, which is one of the problems on our peatlands at the moment, and the idea of the water slipping away through particular things with different plants and creatures coming in and out of it. So
and if we just fast forward, so the dynamic earth, which I just love this image. I love kind of the mobility within this image, and the kind of the sense of restorative and kind of like regenerative potential here. I always think of that crescent. It could be the crescent moon, it could be a stag beetle waving its horns. It's there's just so much going on here that could be cosmological, that could be natural, that could be animal life, or or human hands helping to regenerate things. Pick out something here to tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that you see all these different I think that's one of the exciting things, is that people see in it the things that they want to see. And I really like that about artwork. It doesn't have to be particular things. And sometimes I'm not sure what it is when I'm making it exactly. It's maybe sort of a mixture of things. But yeah, this one has all sorts of, I suppose, more close little views on pools. So we've got on the right-hand side some of the sphagnum pools and the idea of sphagnation, and then different sort of plants coming in and out, and then standing stones with their, I love the idea with standing stones. When we see them on Dartmoor and Exmoor and things, you see the tops of them and you have no idea of this sort of deeper root. It's a bit like a tooth going into the land, isn't it? And yeah, what it's part of. So yeah, and it also just that idea of the movement and the life in it. But I think it's lovely the way these things, you make them and then you don't know where they're going to go. And I suppose for you, Mel, you had the sort of the inspiration to create this book as part of an academic project, but did you sort of imagine what it could be and what a sort of long life this book has had and what other things have come from it?
No, I think I was just delighted to kind of achieve this little gathering of people, and it is the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? Because it's established all these different creative networks and other projects. Nikki Whitehouse, for example, at the same time we were running this, had her own creative project with there's a wonderful web resource where they were delving into the representation of Scottish peatlands. So we started collaborating. We visited some of her sites. That led to new poems from some of the poets involved, and she's actually hosted our materials that arose from this project. But I suppose for me, it just started a kind of a relationship, didn't it, that has really developed. My particular expertise is bog bodies, along with other kinds of Iron Age funerary remains. And at Manchester University, I'm part of the kind of, in a way, the Manchester Museum that looks after, curates the head of a bog body called Worsley Man. So it's been one of my great privileges to work on him and a number of other fragments of bog body from around Lincolnshire and the Yorkshire region. And this summer we brought a lot of that work together. Your lovely peat collages, a film that you made around that we call Boglore. We worked with David Heek, the filmmaker, who'd made a film called Moss Fox around the ceramic practice of Liss Ellis. We drew in some of the historians from Manchester and poet Abby Flint, and we basically took over the ground floor of the British Academy. They had a folk lore theme, and we wanted to kind of, as Jane said, find those different stories, tell those different narratives about the creative and productive power of the bog. So I mean, Rose is a wonderful sound artist as well, so the Boglore film really, literally bubbled with the sound of the bog and the kind of the life that comes from it. And then in Liz's wonderful sculptures, we brought some of its animal life to light. And this was your collage, wasn't it, Rose, that we commissioned for the celebration of the 40th anniversary of Lindo Man. And I've been working with the peatland restoration communities around Wilmslow, Transistors Wilmslow, who are working hard to, enable people to see that bog in a very different way. And I love the fact that you responded to it by basically making Lindo Man the embodiment of that bog. He is Lindo. And that's what they say. They say he's our champion. That's how people know what Lindo Moss is, because they remember the bog body. And again, tell us a little bit about the inspiration for this, Rose, because I just love this image. It's just so powerful, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was this one was a pleasure to make, Mel, and I think part of that was, Lindo Man is such a it's such an interesting material remain down in the British Museum now, but also that he has this huge continued relevance to people and, as you say, to communities. And I think all this work with bog bodies that we've been doing, and you're so good on, is, I think, so poignant because it is about people. It's about empathy, and it's about trying to understand a life that we've discovered the very last little material part of, isn't it? And I think we've worked on a couple of different bog bodies together now, haven't we? And I think I'm always struck by how close you become to this idea of a person, and you don't necessarily know much about that person, but they really become quite important to you as you make them, and you feel a responsibility in how you present them to the world and the ways in which you can possibly make people think about them. And I think that was very much on my mind when I made this piece on Lindo, trying to get away, I suppose, from the idea of when you're dealing with bodies, it's very easy to sort of either go down the kind of bodies kind of route, or that it's also very sensitive. So how do you deal with a body artistically and create a sense of it in a landscape without necessarily sort of making it too forensic or too detailed or too much about the kind of death side of it? I think I'm more interested in him as an entity, as a whole body, as a life in the bog, and how he, as you say, how he's made that place into something else, and he continues to form that community around him. And with this one, when we went to visit Lindo Moss, didn't we? We went out with a lovely ecologist, John, and we were walking around, and I was really struck by the colours that you get in that bog. And it's a bog that they've been excavating for many years for the peat, isn't it? So it's sort of cut down into it, but these sort of edges, and then along it you've got just the beginnings of things coming back, and the birch is coming back, but these sort of scars of this dark ochre red peat that comes out, and really sort of, for me, that's what gets absorbed into the body, isn't it? Yeah. So here in this collage, he's sort of emerging from the bog, but also his body is also the kind of topography of that bog. And it's interwoven with all the different mosses, and we found amazing lichens there and things, and the lichens are sort of growing up within him and regenerating the bog. So it's about how that body becomes the future, I suppose. But that was a lovely event that you ran in the Manchester Museum for Lindo. And I think one of the lovely things was the curators talking about curating him, wasn't it, in the British Museum?
Yes, yeah. And the kind of the way in which he has shaped kind of lives who've been, lives as children that have gone on. There's one curator in particular, Jim, who has become responsible for his physical care within the museum. And he met him as a very young child and formed a kind of a bond out of, repeated visits. And it's a very moving story of those connections that people have to these remains, showing them a kind of care in their afterlife that maybe they were denied during their main life. So I'm just going to end very quickly because I want to make sure that we show this. This is so we don't just work alone, do we, Rose? We have lots of other lovely creative friends, particularly Abby Flint, the poet, but Liz Ellis, who worked with us on the Lindo celebrations, created a series of foxes inspired by the fox fur armband that is around Lindo Man's upper arm. And she had all sorts of different foxes, hunting foxes, swimming foxes. But this is Moss Fox. This is the battered and bruised embodiment, again, of that Lindo Man story. And these I find incredibly moving in terms of reconnecting us with the more than human life that saturates these places.
And Mel, have you found that through these projects, you've been taking them back into the university and into sort of academic circles? Have you found that people have reacted differently to them and these kinds of creative projects?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things as an archaeologist is, the first time I met with some of my geography colleagues, one of them very honestly said, I teach about the formation of bogs and then I teach about us cutting them away. And I didn't realise anything happened in between. So for us, there are thousands of years of people living well and respectfully in and around bogs, and when they're really wet, they don't go right into their heart unless they are engaging in something really very special, like acts of deposition. And he just had no knowledge that was part of the history of the peatlands. So I think the power of the creative to engage people and is to make them see them in different ways. And with the best will in the world, sometimes that means not just simple photographs of recovery projects, as important as those are. It's that imagining of other kinds of connections with their humanity and their plant life and their animal life that enables people to put themselves in context, I think, in terms of that long-term story.
Yeah, the past is the thing we need for going forward into the future, isn't it?
Yeah. We've probably had our allotted time, have we?
So
I will stop sharing and come back into the room. And thank you very much for hosting us and allowing us to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Rose and Melanie. It was absolutely fascinating. And one of the things we often talk about when we're getting into peat and bogs is this, it's Anders sphagnum moss, its ability to hold life and death at the same time. And, the anaerobic so-called rotting, but at the same time, it's still alive. So all of that threaded through Rose's wonderful collages and painting was really nice. Really good way of thinking about the heritage and of peat and the way artists can imagine a future through peat. So yeah, thank you. And we're now moving on to Ben Totterdell and Sophie Tyler from Exmoor National Park. They're going to be talking about how young people that they work with get really immersed in the peat heritage and how young people view this work. So I'm going to stop talking and just let you talk about your young rangers and your pioneers, Ben, and how they get. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Naomi, and hello everyone. So I'm Ben.
I'm Sophie. We work at Exmoor National Park.
And I'm sure, as many people know, national parks, are very much interested in how we can enable people to enjoy and understand the environments that we've got. Here on Exmoor, we're lucky to have a real variety of amazing habitats, and Peatland is certainly one of those. So we're just going to briefly run through our Young Rangers programme and how that relates to some of that nature connection, and specifically to the sort of peatland habitat. So I'm just going to make sure I can share my thing. Let me just start. Cool. Can we all see that okay?
Not yet, Ben.
It's not come up yet, Ben.
Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, brilliant.
Fine.
Okay, so in terms of what we do as a national park, in terms of that sort of nature connection and engagement, then we've got a formal and informal education programme. So where we're looking at here is our residential centre at Pinkery. Some of you may know, some of you may not. So it's 400 metres up in its own sort of little valley in the headwaters of the River Barle, which in its own time flows and joins up with the River Exe and then all the way down to Exmouth. It's originally a farmhouse. It's been for 40 plus years now. It's been a residential education centre for young people from Somerset, Devon and further afield to come and, really experience what it's like to be in an upland landscape. And as you can see in the image, we've got Pinkery Pond up the top there, and we're really accessible onto some very wild and quite interesting habitats. And it really is a unique experience, because for the young people coming up there, as you said, we're off grid. We've got a wind turbine, we've got solar panels, we've got biomass. It really is somewhere where nature connection is easier than in many other places. In fact, it's quite hard not to connect with nature when you're up there. But more specifically, in terms of those young people that we have up there, we're very, very keen to make sure that the offer that we have to young people is equitable. Because all too often, if we don't take action, we can find ourselves predominantly engaging with younger people from backgrounds where they maybe already have that connection and maybe have those experiences and opportunities. So I'll hand over in a minute to Sophie to talk about how our Young Rangers programme specifically looks to target young people from different backgrounds and then gives them those amazing opportunities to engage in our natural environment. Have to use it. Where is that? There we go.
Excellent. Yeah, so we are currently moving into our 5th year of our Young Ranger programme, and we decided really early on that we were going to target very specific young people. So they are all in year 10, mostly at school, year 10 or 11 at school, and we work really closely with schools so that they're kind of selected based on a really loose criteria of being in receipt of free school meals or facing kind of significant life challenges, whether that's they need additional attention or intervention just based on their life circumstances at the time. They also might fall into that grey man area, the people that kind of bob along a little bit unnoticed at school. So those are the young people that we target. They must be attending school, sort of wouldn't normally have that kind of opportunity. Anybody else that works in sort of like the youth sector know exactly the young people I'm talking about. So yeah, that's who they are. If you want to move on. Yep. So as you can see, the first thing that we do is we take them to our Pinkery Centre, and we have a real intensive bonding experience. We take them on a residential, and the very, very first thing that we do with every single cohort of young people is take them up onto the high moor, up to the pond, and this is always the outcome of that. It is so tactile up there. It's all of the senses are being explored. They are touching it, they are wet, they are laughing, and it's just a real connective moment. And this is from our recent cohort of young people, but for the last 5 years, I can pull this photo up from every single cohort. Every single one of them want to go in, they want to touch it, they want to get their boots stuck, they want to feel it on their feet. And so we find a real moment for them is connecting, and it's connecting through bogs. They absolutely yeah, it's a real winner for us, and we wouldn't change that. And we're really lucky to have this environment to explore. So this is just a couple of pictures from our most recent cohort of young people. But overall, we try and give them a really broad kind of introduction to national parks and national landscapes and working in conservation and green careers. So this is a little bit wordy, you don't have to read it all, but essentially we have a get to know you day, which is usually bog playing day. Then we have a 3-day residential, and then we follow that up with upskill days throughout the year. And those upskill days are chosen by them. So we try and weave in sort of co-design into the project, and we give them a menu of activities that they could choose from. And they get to choose their upskill days for the rest of the year. So it kind of, we work seasonally with our young people. These are kind of like the menu of choices that we give them, and they get to choose 3 to 4 that we do. And you can see we've got peatland exploration on there. We're really lucky this year to be part of the Peatland Fest, so we were able to weave our young rangers into that. But through that, they chose this year to, and these are the things that they chose: marine wildlife surveys. They really love marine world, upland ecology, which was part of our peatland work, and then the treescapes. They really interested in looking at trees and things like that. So these are the things that our young people say. My favourite part was the pond walk, because I got to go somewhere I've never been before, and you know, these are absolutely the feedback that we get from our young people, which is really great. So like doing conservation, or you know, making a difference, being part of it, actually doing things, are the things that we really find bond our young people together. But that's a really quick overview of our young rangers. We could talk a lot about it because we're really proud of them.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of summarise, I mean, I think for us, it's, you know, we know the value that giving young people the opportunity to really directly engage with our habitats, including peatland, gives, but it's also, it's really refocused us on just how many young people that experience is so difficult and unattainable, and actually just putting the work in place that enables those young people that wouldn't have that experience to have a completely different. I mean, many of these young people would never have, you know, considered wandering around the uplands, you know, exploring bogs, you know, getting wet, doing all these things, visiting a farm, and the benefits that we find in terms of just that horizon. You know, we've got one of our young rangers is now working for us as an apprentice. Never would have happened. You know, young people who have really found you know, a new connection with nature, have changed career paths, and within that and the tools that we use, you know, it's not just about knowledge transfer, it is about you know, imagination, it's about art, they make films. So it's really about using nature to build confidence and to try and enable that sort of sense of young people feeling that this is part of a shared heritage. It's not something that's other to them. It's about saying, you're welcome, come along, let's go and have some fun, and this is something that's important for you as well as for us. And yeah, we really love it. We'd love, if we had more capacity, we'd do more of it, wouldn't we?
I think a really lovely just connection story for us this year is that you know, I could tell you amazing things about all of our young rangers, but one of our young rangers, Alfie, lives in a really isolated community, and he attended our Peat-Fest event here on Exmoor, and he brought his dad, and that was a really significant moment for him and his dad. His dad and neither of his mum and dad drive. They don't have access to a vehicle, and because of the funding, we were able to put on a minibus to have communities come to events like that, and he chose to bring his dad to that event, and there was just a really nice connective moment for that it kind of brings people together beyond habitats, beyond all those things. We're connecting people to people and people to nature, and I just think that's a really lovely story.
Great. I think that's probably our 10-minute summary, but do get in touch with any further questions.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Ben and Sophie. That was great. And actually, I met Ben and his dad and the other young rangers at that event, and it was really great to meet them, but also it was quite moving to invite them even to where we were making some of the mossy carpet we've been developing, inspired by the peatland sphagnum mosses, and thinking about future. And we had such a lovely conversation while making and getting creative, and giving them another way in to look at nature and to think about the future as well. So we were really appreciative of that. So thank you guys. We all had a great, yeah.
And it was great. We were very lucky to have Rachel and a colleague from Repeat to come up as well on one day, and that was really inspiring to learn some new techniques of engagement. So thanks to Rachel and the team for that as well.
Yeah, thank you then. Next then, as part of this Peatland Stories, looking at heritage and looking at the way people are connecting with peatlands, we are moving on to Rachel. We've just been talking about Rachel, who is part of Repeat and is a key partner with our delivery of Peat-Fest South-West across the region. Wears many hats, don't you, Rachel? You're doing an awful lot of engagement and writing and traveling and production. So thank you very much for that. I'll hand over to you then. You're going to be sharing the way Repeat uses creativity in the case of sort of peatland justice and looking at the future. So I'll hand you over, or I'm handing over to you.
Thanks so much, Naomi. And yeah, thanks, Ben. It was really great to come to Pinkery. We had a really great time. So yeah, I'm going to share my screen with deep intention because there is a video with sound that I want to make sure that you all get to hear. So I'm just going to stare deeply into my screen to make sure I do it correctly. Can we see that?
Yeah, can see that, Rachel.
Yes,
great.
We can see that. Sorry, I was on mute. I'm now muting myself again. Thanks.
Excellent. So hi, I'm Rachel. I'm from Repeat. Some of you have worked with Repeat before, sort of come up a little bit in some of these presentations already. So we are a collective of originally young people, but now aging, people who are excited about peat, people who are artists, researchers, campaigners, who are thinking about connecting with peat in different ways. We're across the continent, so we're on mainland Europe, we're in the UK, we've been in Vancouver briefly, and we think about how peatland is connected across these spaces, but also really trying to get hyper specific about what's happening in each place as well, and how we can learn from these different spaces. And what Repeat is really interested in is trying to shift the narrative that peatlands are waste spaces, that actually there's, as we've heard already today, there's so much happening and there's so much to connect with and learn about and be inspired by. And while we do many, many different things, that's sort of like at the core of all of our work is, yeah, how can we really begin to shift this narrative? So this is because of the fact that we're all in so many different places, we don't actually have a team picture of everyone, but this is some of the wonderful faces who are involved in Repeat. And so we have many projects. I thought this might be the easiest way to show it to you. So we have the Peatland Justice campaign, which is specifically campaigning for the stopping of using peat in compost. We have Peat-Fest, which was the first Repeat project, which was an online festival of different people working with peat in different ways, and that has evolved and is now Peat-Fest South-West with the amazing championing by Naomi and Art and Energy. We have the Bog Academy, which happens in Ireland, which is going into primary schools and like working with kids to think about moss and their local bogs. The Restoration Academy, which is more kind of hands-on restoration work. The Moss Pit, which is a sound installation, which if any of you have come to some of the Peat-Fest South-West events, you will have been able to enjoy. Books and Bogs, very much what it says on the tin. Paludi Food, which is a slightly newer project where we're looking at working with chefs and growers who are growing food in wetland to create food cultures around wetland food. Peat Pen Pals, which is actually something we've been doing as part of Peat-Fest South-West, which I'll talk a bit more about further in the presentation. And Peatlands and Grief, which is a newer project thinking about how we can process loss, both around climate anxiety, the climate, but also personal grief in our own lives and the connection and what we can learn from peatland. Okay, tell me if you can't hear this.
Something about peatlands, to the fens.
Deep in the fen are tigers asleep, with thatch overhead and clay underneath. Rushes dance freely and poplar trees hum, but the water it knows just what has been done. Clodfuls of peat, on this land where the sphagnum runs deep. To save our way we mustn't obey, so the tear demon waters are free. A stirring moves now our story along, for the fen tigers rose to the sound of bird song, and each of them looked each other in the eye when they saw that their once wet land was dry. Clodfuls of peat, on the land where the sphagnum runs deep. To save our way we mustn't obey, so the tear demon waters are free. With spanners and hammers they now took to roam, for they didn't have their lanterns alone. And into the night with the will of the wisp, the fendom was saved from turning to crisp. Clodfuls of peat, on this land where the sphagnum runs deep. To save our way we mustn't obey, so the tear demon waters are free. So if you're in doubt and hearing this song, there's more to be found than what is now known. With dikes in the marshes where memory lives best, and your watery reflection a tiger's abreast, and your watery reflection a tiger's abreast. Clodfuls of peat, on the land where the sphagnum runs deep. To save our way we mustn't obey, so the tear demon waters are free.
So this was a music video that we made as part of FenFest last year now, where we organised the festival, wrote the song ourselves, filmed the video, and then made the video at a London Peat-Fest. But this was like really, we have some people that we were connected with within Peterborough, and we went in and we ran this day event. And now there is a community of 77 people in the WhatsApp group chat who are all organising and bringing in their own amazing work that they're doing around peat, that is like really a local group that are championing reconnecting to the peat and thinking about peat justice and wetland justice in the fens. And I think this is something that we're really trying to do, especially with Peat-Fest, is thinking about how we're this organisation that spans so many spaces, but how can we go in and use this creative method to get people excited about peat and then kind of go off and really champion it with their own community and build community around it. So we also have an exhibition that's just opened in Drenthe in the Netherlands that if any of you happen to be around, I would really recommend checking it out. It's really amazing. Where they're really thinking about kind of the localism of what is happening with peat over there, which is in the Netherlands still a lot of peat extraction in relation to compost and horticulture. And so as part of Peat-Fest, we've been getting kids to write to each other from each location as peat pen pals to really try and start to connect thinking about peat across all of these spaces. But what's been really amazing about the way that Peat-Fest is set up is that we've been able to create these workshops for each site that are the Dorset, the Avalon Marshes, Exmoor, Bodmin Moor and Dartmoor, and it's just been really gorgeous to be able to do these sort of have the space to do these sort of hyper specific workshops. So this was us writing folk songs at Upton Heath. You'll recognise someone in this picture. And then this was on Dartmoor with a hydrophone, listening to sounds in the bog. This was at Pinkery. We went out and got the kids to collect things from the walk, and then we recreated the maps using our found materials when we got back as part of multiple other mapping exercises to think about how we can think about mapping peatlands, not just in a cartographic sense, but in other ways. We wrote our own folk story at Shallowford Farm, and then made masks with things that we found from around the farm, and then performed it to the sheep. And then this was in Lisgard, Heritage Day, where so we played a Peat dialect game. So Zamzoddy means to be like wet or soggy. It's a dialect word for peat from the South-West. And we got the young folks and some of the other archaeologists from the event to create bog bodies from these words. And then we created peatland character sheets to try and begin a creative writing session where we began by thinking of these characters and thinking about all the different archaeological finds that we might find up on Bodmin Moor, and then how our characters would all interact with each other. I'm going to stop sharing now. And I think it's just really been so amazing to see all of these kids get so excited about all of these different ways of connecting with peat. But like really, when we think about they're now thinking about peat in these like long ways and thinking like, okay, like now I can connect, and we really see this as a first step of like we're getting them excited, but what is this like longer term? How can we connect them? And that's where the delivery partners really come in, and like Ben and like all of the amazing people that are doing this restoration work. And it's just quite magical. And that's what Repeat is really excited about at the moment. That's what we're really trying to do here, but we're also trying to replicate it in other spaces. So yeah, that's probably about my 10 minutes, but thanks everyone.
Thank you very much, Rachel. We're looking forward to seeing you next week at the private view of the exhibition in Plymouth, and the finale at the end of Saturday, the 22nd, of course, where there'll be some more music, folky music, some Peat Pal letters, and a whole host of different things. We've got a rapper as well who's going to give us a little bit of alternative view of the wildlife on peatlands. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you, and it's been good working with you as well. Thanks for coming along today. So, and we've got a lot more to do as well, haven't we, Rachel, for over the next 2 or 3 months? So yeah. Moving on to our last presenter, and this is my colleague Chloe Uden, who's founder director of Art and Energy, and she's particularly passionate about the power of creativity to make change, aren't you, Chloe?
I am.
And she's gonna give us a sort of outline of what that means to you and us and the world.
Sure. Okay. Well, I have to say, I'm feeling a bit nervous. Everyone's done such lovely presentations. I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to follow any of that? That's very, very anxiety raising for me, especially as I don't have lots of pictures. But I do have some audience interaction. So I'm hoping very much that I can persuade people to participate in the chat with 2 questions. So get your fingers ready, and hopefully we'll be able to all make something together. So I'm going to be talking about the role of creativity at this time. And I suppose what that means is thinking about, firstly, what is this time that we're in? And I came to thinking about this by thinking about what if creativity isn't just decoration for our lives, but maybe like the skill that will help us to survive and flourish, and to choose Naomi's words, to face whatever the future holds. And so I have been thinking about where we're at the moment, and obviously climate emergency is the thing that people around the world are talking about at the moment, with COP30 going on. I'm wondering, can I spotlight myself so that people can see me, because I'm not sure whether I am spotlighted at the moment. Oh, am I spotlighted? Oh, I can just see everyone. This is great from my view. Okay, great. So yes, COP30, people around the world are talking about climate change, and that brings up loads of feelings for people. You know, you can talk about eco-anxiety. That's a very small aspect of the emotions that you can feel in response to the climate situation. I think lots of us are noticing more polarization in the world. Lots of us who are working very hard experience burnout. There's all of this technological acceleration that leaves us feeling a bit left behind, and, you know, AI, which sort of makes things easier, but also sort of existentially terrifying. And so now is kind of a time for new kinds of courage, and it's a time for new kinds of imagination. And so I wonder if you might be able to share a word or two words about what it is that you are experiencing in the world right now. What's the feel that you're getting from the world right now? And we'll share some of those things in the chat. I'm hoping that people are going to feel brave enough to make a start at sharing something that they're noticing about the world, the things that they're feeling. Yes, I totally with you, Laura, on the overwhelm and the burnout, yes, and the sliding and the division and the anger. Yeah, we definitely have a load of all of those things. And those things, the disappointment in our leaders, the frustrations and the fears are tricky. And then you get things like determinedness, which is a good feeling to have in response to those things. So over the last few years, the Art and Energy Collective have been exploring creativity in this space. And we found all sorts of things that are benefits to us and perceived benefits to the people around us of what creativity does. And so my second question for you is, when you reflect on your own life and you reflect on your own experience of creativity in the arts, I'm wondering, what is it that those things are giving you? What is it that the arts give you as an individual? And I'm going to share some of the things while you're adding your words into the chat. I'm going to share some of the things that we've noticed. So in the very first instance, and this is coming from a climate change perspective, over the years, we've begun to notice that the majority of art forms are in their essence kind of low carbon activities. They're, you know, singing, poetry writing, you know, drawing. They're not hugely carbon emitting things. And when you're thinking about how we're going to spend our time in the future, we're going to be spending our time doing low carbon things. Hopefully, that's the ideal vision. And so filling our lives with activities like the arts are things that we can do without feeling paranoia and guilt, because they're not only good ways to spend your time for the planet, but they're also really good ways of spending time for our communities and for our well-being. They can help us navigate in a time of confusion and overwhelm. And I would say that creativity isn't a luxury. In fact, we begin to see it as kind of a form of resistance, a way of building resilience and renewal. And certainly through the projects that we've been working on with the Moths to a Flame and the Mossy Carpet, we've seen how exploring the world through creativity helps us to make sense of it. And it's not just about how we make things, but it's how we see the world. And it's a way, Naomi brings the play to art and energy. And I have learned through working with Naomi that art making, creativity is a way for us to play. So, you know, we all recognize that before we can speak, we sing, and before we walk, we dance. And so for adults, the arts are one of the few ways that we can still play. And by playing, we allow ourselves to feel better, but also explore the world in new ways, and it helps us to learn from the world. And, you know, if we want to go into kind of business speak, it helps with innovation as well. And one of the things that I'm noticing that is coming up for me at the moment is that creativity broadly is kind of anti-fascist. It's kind of anti-perfectionist, because you kind of can't really do creating if you're going to give yourself really strict rules, and if you're going to be all fighty and arguey, and you kind of can't get to that creative place if you're going to be too perfectionist about stuff. So it really supports people to develop their curiosity, develop empathy and courage, and imagine alternate ways of living with more compassion and empathy. Now, I bet all of you have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So, you know, something that we often revisit at the time of COPs. So every year we're invited to think about those. One of the things you might not have come across is a thing called the Inner Development Goals, which is a partner framework that goes alongside the Sustainable Development Goals. And they're a set of inner qualities, inner skills that help us to actually deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. And when you look at them, and I do strongly invite you to check out the Inner Development Goals, what you'll see is that all of the skills and resources that are being invited to be delivered in those Inner Development Goals to meet our sustainable future are all things you develop by practicing creativity. So on a very kind of basic level, by practicing the arts, you, no matter whether you're a professional artist or not, by practicing creativity, you develop the skills and qualities it takes to face the future. And so I suppose what I'm saying is it's really important for all of us to be developing our creativity, whether that's spending time cooking or gardening, or, you know, enjoying going for a walk in nature, or sitting and drawing or something, or writing a poem to a loved one, or, you know, singing something to someone. The skills that you're developing in doing those things will help you to face the future. So I'd like to invite you to practice creativity yourself, even if you don't see yourself as an artist or whatever. That really isn't the most important thing, getting to that point where you feel confident to call yourself an artist. What's more important is that you fill your life with things that make you feel better. But I want to sound a warning bell at this moment, because creativity is being stripped from our education. It is undervalued economically. And I think that comes from a history of people not really understanding what creativity and the arts does for us. You know, I've seen, and I'm sure lots of you have seen, people seeing the arts as frivolous, you know, the cherry on the cake, rather than the means by which you create the cake in the first place. You know, we're used to thinking that creativity can be, you know, is something that's just a nice to have, rather than a foundational quality of what it means to be human. And I would also say that AI does threaten to automate tasks, not just tasks, but it could automate imagination itself. And whilst we all know in theory that algorithms can't replace the human experience of wonder and making and connection, when we lose the opportunity to just have a go and fail and do things badly, we lose the opportunity to develop the muscle that helps us build our imagination. And so I would say that although AI can make our lives easier, sometimes the challenge that comes with not being able to use AI prevents us from developing our creative capacities. So finally, I'd like to emphasize that creative habits, regenerative, you know, that act of noticing the light, that act of mending things, the act of creating, you know, seeking beauty, making time to connect, giving each other gifts. Those are all the sorts of ways of being that will help us to be healthily in the world. And if you'd like to come along and explore the themes that we've been, as Art and Energy, exploring with the participants that we work with, please do come along to our exhibition on the 17th to the 23rd of November at the Market Hall in Plymouth, where you'll see loads of examples of the ways that people have been creative with us. And finally, I just want to leave by saying creativity is how we remember who we are, how we care for each other, and how we continue to imagine a world worth saving. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chloe. And a lovely expansion of all the creative thoughts people have been having in relation to the planet, and also right down in relation to our inner selves and our local space. So thanks. And lots of people have been responding to your questions, and I enjoyed that. I was one of them, the sort of feeling of the world being a bit crumbly and violent and distressing at the moment, but it's getting that sense of it being turned around by using the creativity to make positive change, such as that Melanie and Rose talked about. So if anybody has any questions out there for our group, please put them in the chat. Can we have everybody's faces back of the speakers, because it would be good to see us. Have any of the speakers got a reflection on what they've heard today from everybody else? Does anyone want to say anything? You're all...
I think it's very cheering to see how much fantastic work there is going on, especially sort of thinking how, you know, I remember when I first started working with peat, you know, it was very much a marginal area of research and interest, and you know, it was a real struggle sort of getting people interested in it. And it is so cheering to see, you know, just all the different projects that are going on, you know, all the work with young people, and how there's so much sort of a new generation coming through being interested in it all. And I think that's a real thing to take on, that, you know, just how much it has changed in the last decade. It's extraordinary. I'm sure people like Jane have noticed that as well, sort of, you know, seeing it sort of on the broader scale from the IUCN. So yeah, it's a good, very, very cheering.
Great. I particularly liked the fact that if you cut across all of what we, you know, everybody's spoken about, it's reaching such a diverse audience of all ages and all backgrounds, right? And reaching multifaceted ways of inviting people to come and have a look and delve in, from the exhibition at the British Academy to Rose's exhibition, or work with young people and poetry, to Rachel's folk dance. You know, there's something there for everybody, which, and in this case, peat is that lovely, fibrous, interconnecting black substance that, you know, weaves it all together. So it's great. I haven't had loads of questions. I've had loads of people saying it was a very inspiring broadcast, and thank you very much. So that's really brilliant. And this is being recorded, as we've said, so it will be shared beyond, and it will be there for other people to watch outside this live time. And I think we'll end there, Kat. We'll say thank you very much for coming, everybody, and thanks again to the presenters, and we will see you all soon at the next broadcast, if I can get it together. But the next broadcast is the end of November, on the 28th of November, and it is reflecting back on COP30. It's with people who have been involved in that, particularly in relation to peat. Whether anything comes out of the world planet scale meetings for the peatlands around the world, but also in the UK. So hopefully see some of you there. It'll be the same sort of time, an early lunchtime going into lunch. And thanks a lot then. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Naomi.
Thank you, everyone.